My name is Kendra Monroe. I'm 34, and by most people's standards, I've made it. But to my family, I'm still the one who walked away from a real career. As I drove down the winding streets of my father's gated neighborhood, gripping the wheel tighter than I should have, I already knew how tonight would go. Same wine, same smiles, same whispered comparisons, and the same seat as far from the head of the table as possible. They still think I run some little rental side hustle. They have no idea they're leasing their lives from me. Before I tell you what happened at the party, drop a comment if you've ever felt underestimated by your own family. Hit that like button if you've ever smiled while someone talked down to you just to keep the peace. Because what happened next? Well, it started with a birthday toast and ended with a phone call that no one in that house saw coming. I pulled up behind a line of luxury vehicles: Monique's black Lexus, Dad's champagne Cadillac, and Darius's gleaming white BMW, always parked at an angle like it owned the place. I eased my car into place at the end of the line. Not that anyone would notice my vehicle. I'd left the Tesla at my Charlotte office and borrowed Sam's nondescript Ford instead. No one needed to see how well the family failure was doing tonight. As I climbed out, I spotted it. A folded delivery slip taped to the front gate. From Granite and Oak Logistics Zone of our vendor partners. I stepped closer, pretending to smooth my dress. Delivery confirmed. Monroe Properties Project, Phase 2 materials drop. Of course. That guest house expansion my dad's been bragging about in his quarterly homeowners meetings. He didn't know it, but I'd approved the construction line of credit myself 2 weeks ago. I took a breath, slipped the slip into my clutch, and walked toward the door. It opened before I could knock. "Kendra Lynn," my mother greeted, her tone tight and smile tighter. "You're late." "Traffic," I said, offering a polite smile as I stepped inside. The entry smelled like gardenia candles and lemon wood polish, exactly like it had every other year. Nothing changed in this house except the people who got the biggest hugs. The foyer opened into a sea of designer clothes and carefully rehearsed laughter. The Monroe family reunion, Atlanta edition. "Kenny!" Monique called from across the room, her voice 2 octaves too high. She air-kissed me, then pulled back to appraise my dress like it was on clearance. "You look cozy. Did you change in the car?" "Good to see you too," I said. She didn't hear it. She was already back to telling Aunt Simone about her clinic's new therapy wing. I helped finance through a private lender partnership, but who's counting? I moved through the crowd like a ghost. People nodded politely, smiled like they'd forgotten my name. Someone asked if I was still living out of state, somewhere near Tennessee. I didn't correct them. A few feet away, Darius was holding court with a bourbon in hand. And then I said, "Objection, Your Honor, unless you'd like me to show them the emails." Laughter. Applause. Another tale from the legend of Darius, Esquire. Dad stood near the fireplace, beaming, dressed in his classic navy suit with the red pocket square he wore to every family milestone. He shook hands like a politician, nodded like a king. I stayed on the edges, sipped my wine, and smiled at the right moments. Just long enough to be seen. But not remembered. An hour in, I caught Monique telling a cousin that her new wing was totally funded by community donors and a little equity from our family trust. I raised my glass. To the truth that no one wanted to hear. As I turned to find somewhere quiet, someone bumped my shoulder. "Oh, hey, Suri. I didn't even see you there." It was Layla, a family friend's daughter. We'd played hide and seek at barbecues growing up. "Still doing that little rental thing?" she asked brightly. My smile didn't falter. "Something like that." "Well, good for you. I always thought you were more creative than, like, medical school or law or whatever." She meant it as a compliment. And somehow it still cut. As I stepped into the hallway toward the back porch, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. Same smooth hair. Same matte lipstick. But something in my eyes looked different this year. Not tired. Not sad. Focused. I reached into my clutch and ran my fingers across the edge of the folded delivery slip. A small but satisfying reminder. They could laugh all they wanted. I'd already paid the deposit on their dreams. I heard a glass clink behind me. "Everyone to the dining room," my father announced. "It's time for the toasts." Of course it was. I turned, squared my shoulders, and walked toward the table like I belonged there. Even if they still didn't know just how much they owed me. The dining room shimmered like something out of a bridal magazine. Long white candles, silver-rimmed plates, crystal glasses that only came out for show. Same arrangement every year, right down to the folded place cards written in my mother's looping script. I already knew mine wouldn't be anywhere near the head of the table. And I was right. I found it dead last, bottom right, next to a folding chair someone clearly dragged in at the last minute. Meanwhile, Monique and her husband Marcus were seated like royalty, one on each side of Dad. "Everyone, please take your seats." My mother called from the hallway, smoothing her dress like she was introducing royalty. I slipped into my spot, the hem of my dress catching on the loose leg of the folding chair. Of course it did. Plates clinked, chairs scraped. Conversations lowered to a hum. And then Monique stood up. I already knew what was coming, but I still wasn't ready. "I just wanted to say," she began, lifting her wine glass with a perfect, practiced smile, "how grateful I am to be here tonight celebrating the man who shaped everything I am." A few people murmured, "Amen." Monique pressed one hand to her heart, eyes shimmering with practiced emotion. "Dad, you taught me how to show up for others. How to lead with purpose. I hope my clinic, the expansion, the new wellness wing, we hope it reflects the values you raised us with." Another soft chorus of nods. Marcus leaned in, grinning like he just closed a deal. "And none of it would be possible," Monique continued, "without the family support we've always leaned on. I mean, it's the Monroe way, right? The Monroe way." I gripped my water glass, letting my nails press into the condensation. The room applauded. Dad stood to hug her. A full standing hug. 2 hands, real pride. And me? I just sat there, pretending to be invisible. But in my mind, I was replaying something Sam told me just last month. Loan approved. Monique Allen's clinic expansion, under collateralized but greenlit due to family trust cosigner. That trust? Held in my father's name. I took a slow breath. They were applauding her success, not knowing it was built on a structure I created. Not that it mattered. Not to them. A voice pulled me back. "Kenny, didn't you go to Charlotte for some job?" Someone down the table asked, lips pursed like the word job was coated in dust. "I did," I said. "Still there." "Oh, still working at the apartments?" She smiled like she'd just named a childhood hobby. I opened my mouth to correct her, explain that I owned 73 commercial properties, not managed them. That I held debt on most of the buildings this room rented office space in. But I didn't. Because, what would be the point? Across the table, Darius tapped his phone, then turned it so my father could see a video. "Opening statements from this week's trial," he said. "Got picked up by Channel 11. Dad laughed. "That's my boy." More clapping, more praise. More silence when it came to me. I looked down at my napkin. I'd folded it 3 times without realizing. At the other end of the table, Monique leaned in to whisper something to Marcus. He smiled, then lifted his glass again. And I caught just a sliver of it. Don't even know where her money comes from. I stared at my plate. Then slowly raised my eyes and locked onto my father. He was looking at Monique like she'd hung the moon. Meanwhile, I was sitting next to a fern. A literal fern. I couldn't help but laugh under my breath. "You okay?" a voice whispered from beside me. It was my cousin Shay Leone, of the few who actually saw me. "Peachy," I whispered back. But my hand had drifted toward my clutch again, fingers brushing the folded delivery slip. Granite Oak Logistics. The same vendor supplying both the guest house remodel and Monique's clinic. I looked around the room. Candles flickered. My father toasted again. I wasn't at this table to be honored. I was here to watch a performance. And quietly track who owed me. And who didn't even know it yet. The toast started with a glass tap. One quiet clink that echoed through the dining room like a starter pistol. My father stood at the head of the table, his posture straight, his expression composed. Years in the military taught him how to command a room without raising his voice. "I just want to say how grateful I am," he began, lifting his glass. 67 isn't old, but it's old enough to reflect. And I've been blessed. A fulfilling career. A strong marriage. Children who make me proud. He looked left, to Monique. Right, to Darius. His eyes didn't even skim toward me. "To family," he said, raising his glass. "To family," everyone echoed. I raised mine too. But the words didn't come out. Then came Monique, of course. She stood again, radiant in that white silk dress that caught every glint of candlelight. "A toast to Dad," she said, smiling toward him like she was 5 years old again. "Who told me never to settle? Who taught me to lead with my head, but serve with my heart?" Another round of soft mimims and nods from the table. She gestured toward her husband Marcus and added, "Everything we've built to our home, our clinic, our future, it's all because of the foundation you gave us." Dad looked like he might tear up. Or maybe that was pride leaking out in the form of nostalgia. Darius stood next. "My turn," he said, already halfway grinning. "To the man who made discipline look like love. I remember when he woke me up at 5 a.m. just to make me run laps around the backyard." Laughter broke out. My father laughed too. That real, belly-deep kind. "And now," Darius added, "I wake up before my own alarm to prep for court. Legacy, y'all. That's what this man gave us. A legacy." Applause. Someone sniffled. I sat there, silent, invisible under the weight of all that approval. Then someone said it. "Kendra, would you like to say something?" It was Shayla, again. Bless her. All eyes turned to me. Even my father's. I rose slowly, napkin brushing against my skirt, and held my glass gently. "To Dad," I said. My voice sounded smaller than I expected. "You taught us structure. And standards. And the value of showing up. So, happy birthday." I smiled. Brief. Safe. And I sat down. Silence hung in the air just long enough to be uncomfortable. Then my mother jumped in. "So, Monique, how is the clinic's second location coming along?" Her voice was bright, as if I hadn't spoken at all. I blinked. Then stared down into my glass. Still half full. Of course it was. Conversations resumed, now louder. More laughter. Like I hadn't just stood and spoken. Like I didn't exist. I took a sip, letting the wine settle in the back of my throat. And then, a buzz. Barely noticeable, but sharp against the silence inside me. I slipped my phone from my clutch and angled it toward my lap. One new notification. Reynolds portfolio audit. Urgent flag. High risk accounts. I tapped it open. A list. Property addresses. Names, dates. And a bold red tag next to one entry. Monroe Family Trust. Cosigner risk assessment. Flagged. I stared at the screen. There it was. Their foundation. Their future. Their applause and pride and legacy. Built on debt my company now owned. My thumb hovered over the screen. Then I looked up. Dad was laughing again. Monique was telling a story about Carter's tennis camp. Darius was tapping the rim of his glass to the beat of some song in his head. None of them saw me. Not really. I turned the screen off and slipped the phone back into my bag. They'd toasted to the man who gave them everything. And they'd forgotten the daughter who could take it all away. I should have turned my phone off. That would have been the polite thing to do. But polite hadn't gotten me anywhere in this family. So when it buzzed again, vibrating inside my clutch, sharp and insistent, I didn't ignore it. I pulled it into my lap, shielding the screen from view. Incoming call. Miranda. Work. Miranda never called twice unless it was serious. He hesitated. Dinner plates clinked. Monique laughed at something Darius had said. My father was in the middle of telling a story about some mare he once golfed with. I answered quietly. Hey, can't talk long. What's going on? Sorry to bother you, Miss Monroe, Miranda said, her voice crisp and low. But the Reynolds audit just finalized, and we have a situation. I stood slowly from the table. Excuse me, I murmured, not that anyone noticed. Except one. Kendra Lynn, my father called out. Really? Taking business calls during dinner? His voice was part amused, part annoyed. I didn't look back. Just kept walking toward the hallway that led to the front of the house. Once I was out of earshot, I brought the phone back to my ear. Go ahead. Miranda didn't waste a second. We pulled the Adams Creek portfolio from First South's delinquency batch last quarter, correct? Yes, I said, heart already starting to pick up. Within that bundle are 4 properties now officially in default, all Monroe linked. I leaned against the wall near the coat closet. The air was cooler here. Quieter. Still. Details, I said, voice flat but focused. First, the medical office complex in Stonebridge held by Monroe Medical Properties LLC. Your father is listed as the managing partner. I closed my eyes. That's the same building he mentioned during last year's Christmas dinner. Said he was leasing it out for easy retirement income. Miranda kept going. Second, the New Hope Wellness Clinic. Monique's primary location. The note is under Allen Reynolds Healthcare Group, co-signed by the Monroe Family Trust. 3 months delinquent. The same clinic they'd just toasted over. I swallowed hard. Third, a boutique lease in Midtown. Registered to Valerie Monroe under Elegant Interiors LLC. I rubbed my temple. Of course. My mother's pride and joy. Always called it her escape. Miranda's voice softened. The 4th property is an office lease under Darius's law firm. Technically, his partners are listed, but he's the primary signer. I didn't respond. My hand pressed against the wall behind me. Steadying. It wasn't just one of them. It was all of them. And none of them knew they were in default with me. Total balance across the 4 properties is just over $12.1 million, Miranda said. I took a long, quiet breath. And foreclosure protocols? Standard letters have gone out. If no contact is made within 10 business days, legal action begins automatically. I looked toward the dining room. I could still hear them in their forks, scraping, glasses chiming, voices rising and falling like a soundtrack to someone else's life. What do you want to do? Miranda asked gently. We can pause proceedings, flag the files, redirect the legal team. I didn't answer right away. Because in that moment, I felt 2 people warring inside me. One was still the daughter who showed up to every family dinner, hoping just once to hear she made them proud. The other? She was the CEO of a company they dismissed, disrespected, and depended on without even knowing it. I opened my eyes. Don't take action yet, I said. Flag the files as internal priority. I'll handle it personally. Copy that, Miranda replied. I could hear her typing in the background. Efficient. Calm. Anything else? I asked. Just one note, she said. We did find something. Interesting. The loan Monique's clinic holds? It was approved based on a personal assurance from your father. The trust only stepped in when her cash flow projections didn't meet underwriting minimums. Of course it did. Legacy. Family. Image. I'll get back to you by morning, I said. Thanks, Miranda. Always, she replied. I ended the call and lowered the phone. Stood there a moment longer. The family photos on the wall next to me caught my eye. One from Monique's wedding. Another from Darius's law school graduation. A framed photo of Dad receiving a community leadership award. Not one picture of me since I left for Charlotte. Not one. I slipped my phone back into my clutch and started walking back toward the dining room. But this time, I wasn't coming back as a guest. I was walking in as someone who finally understood the value of silence. And how much noise it could make when you spoke at the right time. I walked back into the dining room slower this time. Not because I was hesitant, because I was calculating. They were halfway through dessert, the plates now messier, the wine flowing more freely. Monique was still holding court, retelling some story about a wellness retreat in Sedona like she invented silence and sage bundles. I slipped back into my seat. Nobody looked up. No one asked if the call was important. It didn't matter. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was just underestimated. Which, as it turns out, can be a kind of power. "Everything good, dear?" My mother asked with that soft smile voice she used on waitresses and real estate agents. "Just work," I replied. "Still hustling," Darius muttered, "even on Dad's birthday." His tone wasn't cruel, exactly. But it carried that weight like I was chasing something I'd never quite catch. Monique gave a light laugh, like she didn't even register it as a jab. Just the family rhythm. And then my phone buzzed again. "Miranda, work. Calling." I should have let it go to voicemail. But my hand moved on its own. I tapped accept and pulled the phone to my ear, not realizing my thumb had hit the speaker icon. "Hey, Miranda, I'm at the table, make it quick," I said quietly. And then I froze. Because the room fell silent. Too silent. And Miranda's voice came through crystal clear. "Understood. Just wanted to confirm that all 4 delinquent loans are now officially tied to Monroe Family Properties. Stonebridge Medical, New Hope Wellness, Elegant Interiors, and D&D Legal." I didn't even breathe. Fork stopped midair. My father's hand hovered above his glass. Monique's smile stiffened into something unreadable. Only Miranda kept going. "I've paused the foreclosure process for now, as requested, but we'll need written directives by end of day tomorrow or legal will resume proceedings. Let me know if you want me to handle direct outreach to." I slammed the phone face down on the table. Too late. Every syllable had echoed through the mahogany dining room like it was part of a symphony. No one said a word. No one needed to. I looked up slowly. The expressions around the table were kaleidoscopes of confusion, realization, pride, panic, and fear. Because for the first time, they saw me. Really saw me. Not as the youngest daughter, the always working one, the girl who left Atlanta and didn't look back, but as the woman who now held the ledger. "You all heard that, right?" I said softly. My voice was calm, clear, almost gentle. Darius blinked. "That can't be right, our firm's current. We just did a refi last fall." Miranda wouldn't be wrong. Not about numbers. Monique was already digging into her clutch, tapping on her phone with trembling fingers. "What was that about the wellness center?" she asked, trying to keep her tone light. "That must be some kind of mix-up." Dad didn't speak. He just stared at me, as if I'd become something he didn't quite recognize. Finally, he set his glass down with care and folded his hands in front of him. "Kendra, what exactly was that about?" I met his eyes. For the first time in years, I didn't look away. "That was a courtesy call," I said. "One I didn't intend for you to hear, but since it's out in the open now. Yes, the Monroe Trust has loans in default, and my company holds the notes." A beat. And by my company, I don't mean I'm just an executive. I own it. Another beat. I approved those loans, and now I'm the one deciding what happens next. There it was. The silence didn't just fill the room, it thickened it. You could have heard a spoon drop on the carpet. I glanced down at the linen napkin in my lap. It was embroidered with a gold M. The family crest. The same crest on the trust's filing papers. Symbolic, I guess. That they'd wrap this entire meal in legacy, while forgetting who was holding it all together. "I didn't come here to talk business," I added, softer now. "But business has a funny way of following you when it's never been handled right." Mom finally found her voice. "Kendra, sweetheart, if something is wrong, we can fix it. I'm sure your father didn't mean to put you in the middle of anything." "He didn't put me in the middle," I interrupted gently. "He just didn't know I was standing at the edge." I stood up again. Same motion as before. But this time, every eye followed me. I picked up my clutch, pressed the lock button on my phone, and looked once more at the tablet, the people I had loved for so long in a language they never bothered to learn. "I'll send over the necessary forms tomorrow," I said. And if any of you want to talk before then, you can reach me through Miranda. With that, I turned and walked out of the room. And, this time, no one stopped me. I didn't wake up so much as drift out of a restless fog. The morning sun was already spilling across the edge of the bed when I blinked open my eyes, my phone buzzing with a vengeance on the nightstand. I turned over, my body sore in places I didn't expect. Not from movement, but from holding myself still for too long. 8 missed calls. All from Miranda. A few voicemails too. I didn't need to listen. I could imagine her voice urgent but coded in that polished assistant tone, trying to smooth over the financial firebomb I'd let detonate on speakerphone the night before. I didn't regret what I said. But I hadn't exactly slept, either. Somewhere between 3 a.m. and dawn, I'd wandered out of bed, opened the small leather photo album I always carried, and sat cross-legged on the living room floor. Page 1 was a shot from my 7th birthday. Everyone else in the photo is smiling. I'm in the background, half cut from the frame holding the wrong balloon. That picture always gutted me more than the rest. Not because I wasn't centered, but because no one noticed I wasn't. I got up, pulled on a hoodie, and walked barefoot to the kitchen. The marble floor was cold. I stood there with my hand resting on the fridge handle for a good minute before I remembered I wasn't hungry. I checked the time. 9:03 a.m. That party felt like it happened in another lifetime and somehow, also, 5 minutes ago. Just as I reached for the kettle, I heard it. A knock. 3 short taps, 1 long pause. That rhythm. My pulse stilled. Only one person knocked like that. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Monique. Hair curled, lips done, jacket too clean for someone who'd supposedly been crying all night, as her texts had claimed. I opened the door halfway and leaned against it. "Morning," she said, her voice too light. "Can I come in?" I didn't move. She let out a breath. "Dad doesn't know I'm here." That part surprised me. I stepped aside. She walked in like she owned the place. Same way she used to walk into my room at night and rifle through my drawers in high school borrowing clothes she never returned. I figured we should talk before this becomes a whole thing. I didn't answer. Just watched as she walked over to the same photo album I'd left on the couch and picked it up. "You still have this?" she asked. I nodded. She flipped to a page in the middle. "Oh my God, that trip to Gatlinburg. Remember how we got stuck in the rain?" I did. But I also remembered being the only one without a jacket, shivering while they all laughed under the awning. She set the album down and turned to face me. "Look, last night was jarring. No one expected you to have the upper hand," I said flatly. Her mouth pressed into a thin line. To pull something like that at Dad's birthday. I folded my arms. "I didn't pull anything. I answered my phone. You put us on blast." "No," I said quietly. "I let you hear what I've known for months." "Big difference." She sat down, not asking. The room felt smaller suddenly. "I came because I wanted to clear the air," she said. "Before Dad makes this about pride and turns it into something bigger. It already is something bigger." She looked down. Then back at me, more carefully this time. "You know he's not going to ask you for help. Even if you're the only one who can fix this." I stared at her. "Why is that my problem?" "Because we're still family. I. A silence stretched between us. One that felt like it carried the weight of every moment I'd swallowed my feelings to keep peace that never belonged to me. I glanced at the photo album on the couch again. One picture poked slightly out of its sleeve. Dad, holding a trophy. Me, standing behind him. Out of focus. I looked back at her. If he wants help, he can knock on my door himself. Not send his favorite. She flinched. Then stood. "I'll tell him," she said. As she walked to the door, she paused, fingers on the knob. "He really doesn't hate you, you know. He just doesn't understand who you are now." I met her gaze. "That's because he never took the time to know who I was then." She hesitated like she might say something else. Then just opened the door and left. The quiet after she was gone didn't feel peaceful. It felt like vacuum-sealed tension. I sat back down on the couch and opened the photo album again. One page had come loose in the middle. I picked it up slowly, as if it might crack in half. On the back of the photo, in faint blue ink, was my name. Misspelled, Kendra with an I. I stared at it for a long time. And for the first time since I left that house at 18, I let myself wonder if part of me still wanted to be seen. Even just once. I didn't go back to sleep after Monique left. I just sat there, in the quiet hum of the house, with that misspelled photo still in my hand. The ink had bled slightly, like it knew it had been wrong from the start. By noon, I was dressed. Not in sweats, not in anything soft. Black slacks. A steel gray blouse. Gold hoops. The kind of outfit I used to wear when pitching to developers who underestimated me right up until I bought their land from under them. I was done reacting. It was time to listen. Not to them. To what had always been missing between us. I pulled up the files Miranda had flagged 3 weeks ago. Back then, I hadn't looked too closely. They were from an anonymous tip line we'd set up for an internal audit at my firm, something small, meant to catch vendor scams or double-billed invoices. But nestled in one of those folders was a name I recognized. Monique Ellison. My sister. Apparently, she'd applied for a consulting retainer through a shell LLC tied to one of my holding companies. She listed creative development strategy as her role. With a salary. Monthly. My stomach knotted. Not because I was surprised, but because it had worked. She'd actually been getting paid. I opened another file. This one showed a cash-out refinance from a property we still technically co-owned. A duplex in Memphis we inherited after our grandmother passed. She'd filed the paperwork using Dad's power of attorney and I never signed. That's when I realized something. They hadn't just needed me to stay quiet at that party. They needed me to never look. I called Miranda. "Hey boss," she said, a little too chipper. "You've got press requests lined up from that whole public family drama. You okay?" "I'm fine," I said. "I need you to pull something." Her tone shifted instantly. "What is it?" "All assets tied to the Ellison Trust. Every property. Every signatory. Every account that touches Walter or Monique's names. Cross-reference with anything I have partial control over." A pause. Then, "Oh, you're done playing nice." I didn't answer. Just said, "Text me when it's ready." By 3 o'clock, the documents were in my inbox. I read them like a novel. Walter had overextended more than I imagined, editing into properties I'd funded as seed investments, naming himself a managing director on boards that had no meetings, no records, no actual function. It was legal sleight of hand. And it had worked for years. Until now. Because buried inside one of those partnerships was a clause he must have forgotten. Or maybe never thought I'd understand. If any two co-founders chose to dissolve the agreement, all assets would trigger a 30-day revaluation, opening the books to external auditors. He was sloppy. And scared. And suddenly, I wasn't. I printed one page. Just one. The clause in bold. My initials next to the signature line from 5 years ago. Then I folded it neatly, slid it into a blank envelope, and drove. I didn't call first. Didn't text. Just parked in the cul-de-sac of their neighborhood and stepped out, heels tapping against the warm pavement like punctuation. The Ellison house looked the same. Always had. Gray brick. White shutters. Flower pots that somehow still bloomed in winter. I rang the bell and waited. A few seconds later, the door opened and Dad stood there, caught mid-sentence on his Bluetooth headset, mouth slightly agape. He looked like someone had slapped him across the face with a memory. "Kendra," he said, eyes flicking down to the envelope in my hand. "Didn't expect." I held it out. "Read this." He took it slowly, glancing over the top before pulling the paper out. His eyes scanned fast. Then slower. Then froze. I watched the color drain from his cheeks. "You remember this clause?" I asked. Silence. "I do," I continued, voice calm. Because I'm the one who insisted on adding it. He looked up. A flicker of something between guilt and disbelief flickered in his expression. Why no? He asked. I smiled. Just enough for him to know I wasn't here for revenge. Because you taught me how leverage works, I said. And I've decided to stop wasting mine. For the first time in my life, Walter Ellison had no comeback. I turned and walked back to my car. My hands weren't shaking. My chest wasn't tight. And as I slid into the driver's seat, I looked at myself in the mirror, not as the daughter left out of photographs or the sibling silenced at birthdays, but as a woman reclaiming what was always hers, even if it started with just one page. The knock on my office door didn't come with a warning. Just that sharp, impatient rhythm Monique had always used since we were kids. The kind that didn't ask for permission, just waited for your obedience. I didn't look up. Just said, "It's open." She walked in like it was still her house. I'm only going to say this once, she started, dropping her bag onto the guest chair like it belonged there. What you did to Dad was cruel. I stayed quiet. Let the words hang between us. Let her fill the silence. She did. You don't ambush family with legal threats, she continued, voice tightening. You don't weaponize some dusty old claws to make a point. It's beneath you. I finally looked at her. She was dressed for a fight, sharp heels, flawless makeup, nails that hadn't chipped since the Bush administration. You mean like stealing rental income behind my back? I asked softly. Or getting paid through one of my companies without doing any actual work? That stopped her. For a second, her nostrils flared. That wasn't me, that was Dad. I nodded. Right. And you just cashed the checks. For a second, I almost pitied her. Almost. Because beneath the fury was something else. Fear. Not of losing money. Of losing control. Because for the first time in her life, I wasn't deferring. Look, she said, voice lowering like she was trying to switch gears. We all made choices after Mom passed. Some smart, some not. But what's the point of dragging each other through the mud? You've got your company. I've got mine. Why stir things up now? I stood and walked to the window, letting my fingers trace the edge of the curtain. The sun cast a thin shadow across my desk. On it, the envelope from earlier still sat open. Its single sheet had done more damage than any shouting match ever could. Do you remember Mom's piano? I asked. She blinked. What? The upright one in the den. White keys chipped at the corners, used to pretend to play while she cooked. Her face softened. Barely. I remember, she said. I turned back to her. I offered to take it after she died. You told me it was already spoken for. That Dad wanted it donated. She shifted. So what? So 2 months later, I saw it in your foyer. Silence. I never said anything, I added. Because it was easier. Cleaner. Because it felt petty to fight over something broken. Her lips pressed into a thin line. But I realize now, I said, that's what you counted on. All these years. She stood abruptly. You think you're some martyr now? She snapped. That you're the only one who sacrificed? I gave up plenty too. You think building my brand was easy? You think keeping this family together didn't cost me something? That's when I saw it. Not anger. Resentment. Old, ugly, unspoken. I didn't ask you to keep anything together, I replied. I asked you to treat me like I mattered. Her mouth opened, then closed. And for once, she didn't have a comeback. You know what's funny? I said, voice softer now. Control used to look like you loud, certain, always 5 steps ahead. But real control? I tapped the envelope on my desk. Sometimes it looks like 1 page. Signed at the right time. By the right person. She grabbed her bag, furious now, and moved toward the door. But before she opened it, she looked over her shoulder. This won't end well for you, Kendra. I held her gaze. Calm. Steady. No, I said. It won't end the way you're used to. The door clicked shut behind her. And just like that, the air shifted. Not lighter. Not yet. But clearer. Because I wasn't chasing peace anymore. I was building something else. Boundaries. And even if no one clapped, even if no one came to thank me for it, that was still worth more than their approval ever was. The office was too quiet after Monique left. I stood there, staring at the closed door, waiting for the heat to leave my chest. It didn't. It just sank lower into my ribs, like a dull pressure reminding me I wasn't used to this version of myself yet. The version that didn't apologize just to keep the peace. I walked over to my desk and sat down slowly. My hand hovered over the envelope again. Still open, still undeniable. But I didn't reread it. Instead, I reached for the drawer to my right and pulled it open. Tucked in the corner was an old photo strip, creased at the edges. 3 frames, me, Monique, and our mom at the state fair. Mom had a funnel cake in one hand and her other arm wrapped around both of us. We looked like a team. We weren't. But we looked like one. I leaned back in my chair and let my eyes blur. For a split second, I wanted out. Out of the fight, out of the legal mess. Out of the endless second-guessing. Just walk away, I thought. Let them keep the properties. Let them spin the story however they want. Be the villain. At least I'd be free. But then, I remembered the voicemail. It had come through earlier that morning. A smooth, familiar voice. Polished. Friendly. Manipulative. Hey sweetheart, it's Dad. Just wanted to check in. Hope you're doing okay. Let's not let lawyers and paperwork ruin something we built as a family. I'm proud of you, you know. Always have been. Let's talk soon. Maybe dinner at the club, my treat. Click. That last line echoed in my head like a joke I wasn't in on. My treat. Like he hadn't siphoned thousands from my work. Like he hadn't tried to bury my name behind Monique's branding team. I almost deleted the message right then. But something told me I'd need to hear it again. Still, the moment cracked something open. I got up and walked into the lounge just outside my office. On the wall was a framed sketch Mom had done of the backyard garden. Pencil and charcoal, soft and detailed. She'd signed the bottom right corner with a little heart. I hadn't really looked at it in years. Back when she was alive, she used to spend hours out there pruning, trimming, humming, whatever gospel tune she was stuck on that week. She didn't need applause. Just space. Just care. And when she died, that space disappeared with her. I remember after the funeral, Monique had pulled me aside. "You're the strong one," she'd said, patting my shoulder like a boss congratulating an intern. "Mom would want you to stay focused. You're not the type to break." I wasn't sure if it was a compliment or an order. But I believed it. For years. Until I realized being strong in this family meant being silent. My phone buzzed. Text from Brianna, my assistant. He called again. "Want me to block the number?" I stared at it. Felt the hesitation claw its way back up. Part of me wanted to say yes. Block it all. Him, the noise, the memories. But another part knew I wasn't done yet. I texted back. Number. Keep the line open. Just flag everything. Back at my desk, I stared again at the photo strip. We'd all smiled the same way back then. Like we didn't know what was coming. Like the world was still wide and simple. I placed the photo gently back into the drawer. Closed it. Then turned off the voicemail playback. They weren't going to win this with charm or nostalgia. And I wasn't going to lose by being tired. Because this wasn't just about money. It was about memory. And mine was finally working again. I walked into that meeting room like I owned it. Not out of arrogance. Out of certainty. It was the same conference room they used to parade me through like I was just Walter's creative daughter. Not a partner. Not someone who built a third of the company's brand strategy from scratch. Just decoration. But this time, I didn't sit at the far end. I took the center seat. And I waited. Monique came in first, carrying her designer bag like it was armor. Her heels clicked like punctuation on a statement no one had asked for. She gave me a look, 1 part curiosity, 2 parts caution. Then came Walter. Cool, like always. He smiled that smooth, rehearsed smile and said, "Pumpkin. Glad you came." I didn't answer. Just slid the folder across the table toward them. He glanced at it. "What's this?" "Documentation," I said. "Revenue breakdowns, project timelines, original concepts, all with timestamps, including the email chains showing who created what." He hesitated. Monique picked up the folder, skimmed the top page, and went still. I let the silence hang. I wanted them to feel it. The weight of what they'd buried. The years of credit they'd taken. The subtle ways they'd written me out of my own work. "This isn't about revenge," I said quietly. "This is about truth, about what's mine." Walter chuckled, but it came out thinner than usual. "Sweetheart, no one's trying to take anything from you." I cut in. "You already did." Monique tried to pivot. "Look, if this is about the office situation, we can renegotiate. There's no need for lawyers." That's when I opened the second envelope. The one with the offer I'd been holding back for weeks. "Already done," I said. "You'll be receiving a formal proposal by end of day. Buyout. Full separation. With non-compete clauses clearly outlined. I get the East Side properties. You can keep the rest." Her face drained. "You can't do that, that's." "I can," I said. "I have. It's legal. And fair." Walter leaned back in his chair. His smile gone. That was the moment I knew they weren't ready for this version of me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Because for once, I wasn't begging to be heard. I was stating what was already real. Brianna came in with a fresh copy of the proposal for them to review. Her presence was calm, professional, but I saw the flicker of pride in her eyes. We'd worked hard on this. Quietly, carefully. And now, we were ready. Walter stood. "You've changed." I met his eyes. I just stopped apologizing. He looked like he wanted to say more. But instead, he adjusted his cufflinks and walked out. Monique stayed a few seconds longer. Then gathered her things, pausing just once by the door. "I don't know who taught you to play hardball," she muttered, "but don't think this is over." I smiled, not to gloat, just to breathe. "Then you still don't know me." When the door closed behind them, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. And that was enough. I turned to Brianna. "Send the final draft by 5. Make sure legal signs off." "Already on it," she said. And then, softer. "You okay?" I looked at the empty seats across from me. The ghost of who I used to be still lingering there. Then I nodded. "I'm getting there." As we left the room, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass wall, not just the surface version, but something deeper. Firmer. I didn't need their approval anymore. I just needed to stay the course. After the meeting, I didn't go home. I drove. Nowhere specific, just let the roads pull me along, past traffic lights I barely noticed, through neighborhoods I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. I wasn't running from anything. But I wasn't ready to sit in silence either. Not yet. Eventually, I ended up in front of the old house. It was smaller than I remembered. The porch sagged a little on the left side, like time had finally caught up to it. The paint had chipped, the shutters hung uneven, but somehow, it still looked like the place that once held my whole world. I didn't get out right away. Just sat in the car with the engine off, fingers still resting on the steering wheel. I hadn't been here in years. The last time I stood on that porch, I was 23, suitcase in one hand, my mother's voice ringing in my ears. "If you walk away from this family, don't expect to come back." I hadn't expected to. But now, sitting here, I wasn't sure if I came to remember. Or to forgive. Maybe both. Eventually, I stepped out. The breeze smelled like damp grass and old roses, the kind my mother used to plant every spring before she got too tired to care about things like flowers. I walked up to the porch and sat on the second step. And for a moment, I let myself feel 12 again. Not the version that was brave or defiant, but the little girl who waited for her dad to come home on weekends, who watched her mother scrape together casseroles while pretending nothing was wrong. I closed my eyes, and the memory came before I could stop it. It was a Sunday. I had drawn a picture of my family, and I'd waited all day to show it to Dad. When he finally walked through the door, I ran up and held it out, smiling. He looked down, ruffled my hair, and said, "Cute." That was it. No, "good job," no, "let's hang it up." Just a dismissive glance before he walked past me to kiss Monique, who had stopped by with some client paperwork. The drawing sat on the kitchen counter for 3 days before Mom threw it away. I didn't cry then. But now, sitting on the same step where I'd once waited for his car to pull into the driveway, I let the tears fall. Not because I was still that girl, but because I had spent so many years proving I wasn't. Brianna called. I saw her name on the screen but didn't answer. I couldn't talk about contracts or signatures, not tonight. I needed this ache to run its course. So I stayed. Until the sky turned indigo and the streetlights flickered on. Then I stood up, brushed off my jeans, and walked to the side of the house. The rose bushes were still there. Thinner, untended, but they had survived. Just like me. I clipped one stem carefully and held it to my chest. The thorns pricked my palm. It didn't hurt. It grounded me. Back in the car, I opened the glove box, searching for a napkin or something to wrap the rose in. And instead, found an old receipt from the bakery Mom used to love. And suddenly, I knew where I was going. The bakery was still open. Dim lights. Quiet. Smelled like sugar and cinnamon and old comfort. I ordered her favorite, the lemon tart. And I sat there alone, across from an empty chair, and whispered, "I'm sorry." Not because I owed her, but because for so long, I thought healing meant never looking back. Now I know better. Sometimes, it means remembering. Without rage. Without blame. Just remembering. When I got home that night, I placed the rose in a mason jar on my nightstand. It wasn't pretty. Or perfect. But it was enough. And for the first time in years, I slept without armor. The next morning, I woke before the sun. No alarm. No urgent meeting. Just the quiet thrum in my chest that said, "Today is different." I walked barefoot into the kitchen, still wearing the t-shirt I'd fallen asleep in. The rose I'd picked last night stood silently on my nightstand, its petals just starting to open. I didn't check my phone. Didn't scroll. Didn't plan. Instead, I stood by the window with a cup of coffee, watching light bleed into the sky. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to outrun something. I just stood still. At 9 o'clock, I met Brianna at the office. She had that look equal parts fire and fear. Like she was ready to throw hands and throw up. "I'm sorry," she said, before I could even close the door. "For what?" "For calling you during the party. For stepping in like that. I didn't mean to make things worse." I stared at her for a beat. Then, gently. "You didn't make it worse, Brie. You just ripped the bandage off." She smiled, half relief, half guilt. I reached into my bag and handed her something. The rose. It was still wrapped in the bakery napkin from last night. She blinked. "What's this for?" "For reminding me who I am, even when I forgot." She didn't say anything else, just nodded, held it close. By noon, I'd officially terminated the licensing agreement with Walter and Monique. They didn't fight it. Not really. The silence on the call was louder than any apology they never gave. I didn't need one. Turns out, closure isn't something people hand you. It's something you decide to take. I spent the rest of the week doing something I hadn't done in years, walking the halls of my own company. Not in heels. Not with a calendar full of calls. Just present. The team looked at me differently now. Not because of what I'd won, but because I wasn't hiding anymore. I started putting names back on doors, ones I'd let go too soon. Invited 2 junior designers into my office and asked what they'd build if money wasn't a barrier. One of them cried. That hit me harder than any shareholder report ever had. On Friday, I found myself back at the bakery. I bought 2 lemon tarts. One for me. One for her. I sat in the same corner booth, but this time, it wasn't about sorrow. It was about remembering the parts of her, my mother, that still lived in me. Her quiet grace. Her resilience. The way she'd hum when she thought no one was listening. I whispered "thank you" into the pastry box before walking out. Back at home, I dug through an old storage bin and pulled out a folder full of sketches. The same ones I used to make before I knew what a balance sheet was. There, buried between yellowed sheets and dried-out markers, was the drawing I'd remade 100 times in my mind. The one I'd shown my father all those years ago. I ran my fingers over the crayon lines. 4 people holding hands, by smiles, no labels, just family. I didn't cry this time. I just smiled. Because somewhere in between chasing approval and building empires, I had become the person she would have been proud of. The person I could finally love. The last thing I did that night was write a letter. To the little girl who once waited on that porch. "Dear you," I started. "You don't need to prove anything anymore. You were always enough." I folded it, slid it into a tiny envelope, and tucked it inside the folder with the drawing. Then I turned off the light. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt whole.